this webinar, this allyship webinar this morning. So let's get underway. My name's Lynn Hunt. I'll be your facilitator this morning. I'm a trainer with the Supply Chain Sustainability School. I'm also a self-employed business owner, training company specialising in equality, diversity and inclusion. So that's why you've got me working with you this morning. So a warm welcome to everybody today. So we're going to be looking at being a good ally in the workplace, and I'll take you through this session, which is running straight through from now until 12 o'clock to 11 till 12. So please do get involved this morning. Obviously we can't actually talk to each other in this format, but I'll be keeping an eye on the chat box. So please put your comments, your questions. I'm not sure if the Q&A function is enabled, but I'm going to keep an eye on both the chat and the Q&A. So talk to each other, add your comments, add your points, add your questions. Do our best to get to those during the morning. We will be using an online poll, menti.com. I'll explain how to use that when we get to it. But if you have got a smartphone to hand or you can grab one, that's the easiest way to use it. If you haven't, don't worry, there are other ways to use it. We'll be asking for your feedback at the end. I'll pop in a link to that, and also the slides that we used this morning you will be getting a copy of. So yeah, this is an overview, dipping the toe in the water, if you like, a first look at allyship and what it means and how we can get involved. I'll be providing links to further learning as well if you want to take this further on. So businesses that work to be truly inclusive, they can affect real change by allyship. So an ally is someone who's not a member of an underrepresented group, but who takes action to support that group. The webinar will explore how to be an active ally and to advocate for marginalised groups. It will help us to better understand the experiences of underrepresented groups in the workplace and to know how we can use allyship to promote fairness, inclusion, respect in our business. So this is what we're going to actually be looking at in our webinar, to understand what it actually means to be an ally, why it's important to have visible and active allies in the workplace. We're going to look at how allyship benefits the allies as well as those they partner with, and actually it's great for the whole business. We'll look at some practical steps. I'll link you to some further learning there, and actually a reminder that allyship overarching does support diversity inclusion throughout our whole organisation. So I'm going to take you over to Menti now. Comment in the question and answers, equity, equality, the equity equality thing. We refer to equality. There's a question in the Q&A about equity being more inclusive and suitable than equity, but we're still using equality because it's the law. That's why we're still using that terminology. I think when we talk about allyship this morning, we're talking about equity in terms of fairness, and we're talking about inclusion in terms of it being an active, it's a practical action, and we're talking about mutual dignity and respect for everybody in the workplace, rather than, because I know what you mean, because equality sort of takes us back to more legal compliance, even if that's not the intention of the terminology, isn't it? So absolutely, yeah, we're talking about fairness, we're talking about inclusion, we're talking about respect. Okay, let me take you over to Menti to get some of your get your current position on this. So I'm going to ask you, I'll put this up and I'll show you the address. If you see at the top of the slide there, you can see www.menti.com. So if I could ask you, first easiest way to do it is to go on your smartphone. In the browser on your smartphone, type www.menti.com. You'll get a little oblong box, and it invites you to enter a code, which is at the top of the slide there, 33195902. If you enter that code, you'll see these questions coming up on your phone. You use your phone to answer the questions. And as you can see happening in front of you, you'll see people's cumulative answers appearing on the screen in front of you. Everything, because everything you answer on Menti is completely anonymous, by the way. And obviously with what I'm asking you this morning, there's absolutely no right or wrong with this. It's to get a position, really, just to get a sense of, you know, where you all are on this one. If you haven't got a smartphone, you can open another tab in whatever device you're watching this on and do the same. Type in menti.com, enter the code that's at the top there, 33195902. You'll need to keep this tab open and the new tab you just opened and, you know, flip between the two if you're doing it that way. But that's interesting. Like I say, absolutely no rights or wrongs with that. It's just to get a sort of, you know, little a barometer of feeling really for where everybody is with this at the moment. So thank you for taking part in this. A couple more questions to ask you, and we'll let this one ride a little bit longer and see where we go with this. I appreciate it takes a little while to log on, doesn't it? So a reminder, it's www.menti.com on the browser on your smartphone or on another tab on the device you're using to look at this. And when invited, when you get the little box, you enter 33195902. You use your phone or the new tab you've just opened to answer the questions, and everybody's responses, as you can see, are happening on the screen in front of you. Okay. All right, that's interesting. Thank you. So we have people on the session this morning at very different stages in the journey, which is often the case, and that, you know, that's a good thing. But the important thing is that you have the desire and interest to log on and give up an hour of your time this morning to share this webinar with us. Okay. Okay, so, you know, if you don't understand, I guess that's why you've you know, logged on to find out a little bit more. If you're not sure, if you know a little, you've logged on to, well, let's find out what this is all about. Let's see you know, how this is for me. And if you are fully on board with this, you might be an ally yourself. Use the chat and the Q&A to, you know, share your thoughts, share your expertise, share your experiences for everybody else on the session. Thanks for that. A couple more questions for you. Do you have allies in your business at the moment? And again, there is no right or wrong with this at all. Okay. And the thing about this, a lot of times, you know, people are unsure, and that's no criticism of you not knowing, but it's an interesting thing, isn't it, that we may or may not have these things within our business, and sometimes it's not the initiatives themselves that are lacking, it's the communication surrounding them, you know, and sometimes it's publicizing these things and putting them out there in the right way, in the right places. So if you are somebody listening in a position of influence in terms of comms, that might be something to take on board, maybe. But that's interesting to see how that's, yeah. And actually, someone's put in the chat that we don't have official allies, but we have unofficial ones, and that's a really good point. And somebody says we have fair ambassadors, and of course, one of the roles of a fair ambassador could very well be to be an ally yourself. In fact, it is, you know, the attributes, the role of an ally, of the role of an ambassador, sorry, is very much one of allyship and solidarity, and support in the right places. But yet you might have informal allies, you might not have set up a scheme, and you'll have people demonstrating allyship behaviour, being so supportive to their colleagues without the backing of, you know, a more formalized scheme. Yeah, so really good points there. And the final question for you on Menti this morning: are you an ally? And again, you know, it's perfectly okay to be unsure about this, because this might be the first, you might have decided to join in today to think, I want to think about this. I want to think, is this for me? I want to think how I can get involved. I want to learn about it. So that's fine. We do have some allies on the call, which is great. Okay, fantastic. It is just really interesting to see. Yeah. Okay. So a fur ambassador with some people said that they're not sure what a fur ambassador is. It's a role that you can take on. In fact, we've got fur ambassador workshops coming up in the very near future. The easiest way to learn about what a fur ambassador is and what that role does and how you can get involved is to log on to the Supply Chain Sustainability School website, go to the fur pages, and you'll see a lot of resource there to explain to you what an ambassador is, the role, how you can get involved, how you can take it further. So that's where I suggest you look first off for that one. Okay, so thank you very much for taking part in that. It's interesting to see where we are. So for those of you that are or aren't allies, and for those of you that are not sure, we will now share some more learning and information about this. Okay, so you know, why allies? Well, you can see there that you know, studies indicate that people from minority ethnic backgrounds are consistently more likely to have faced negative everyday experiences, frequently associated with racism, than white people. A poll conducted by ICM indicated that 57% of people who identify as Black, Asian, minority ethnic colleagues in the workplace felt they had to work harder to succeed because of their ethnicity. 40% said they earn less or have worse employment prospects for the same reason. Many LGBTQ plus people don't feel safe to be themselves at work, and they're not confident to be out at work. You know, women in some workplaces struggle to be taken seriously and are talked over in meetings. So there is very much a role for allyship. And allyship is, it's a lifelong process of building relationships based on trust, consistency, accountability with underrepresented or marginalized groups or individuals. It's not self-defined, so the work and efforts must be recognized by those you're seeking to ally with. And it's a great opportunity to learn about ourselves, to grow and support others to build their confidence too. So although you might not be a member of an underrepresented group or a press group, you can support them and make the effort to understand their struggle and use your voice alongside theirs. And why would we do that? Why? Well, allies create a stronger, more positive environment, allowing people to be an open, true version of themselves. You know, that means that there's more trust in your business. The business culture becomes the kind of place where people can be open and be themselves, use their skills and expertise to the full. That's going to help your job retention. It's going to help, you know, commitment, creativity, all of those kind of, you know, tangibles within the business. So that's why we need it, and that's why, basically. So let's move on to look at the role in a little more depth. So we'll define an ally first. An ally is any person who actively promotes and aspires to advance a culture of inclusion through their intentional, positive, and conscious efforts. Any one of us has the potential to be an ally. Allies recognise that although they're not a member of an underinvested or oppressed community that they support, they make a concerted effort to better understand that struggle every day. And because an ally might have more privilege and recognises that they have that privilege, they are a powerful voice against oppressed ones. Also, being an ally doesn't necessarily mean that we fully understand what it feels like to be oppressed. It just means that you recognise that that's the case and you take the struggle on as your own. Okay, and in case we need any convincing as to why we need allies. Let's take a look at a little film clip which will perhaps demonstrate why we do.
You know that little voice in your head? The one that tells you to ignore a tasteless joke.
The one that tells you to keep quiet when a client makes a racist comment.
The little voice that tells you you're not smart enough because English isn't your first language.
Or that it's okay to judge someone for leaving early because they have family commitments.
The one that tells you not to say anything when others are being reduced to stereotypes.
Or that it's not a big deal when everyone's opinion isn't considered.
You may think you're the only one that hears that voice, but that voice also speaks to other people. It says,
You're different.
You're an outsider.
You lack commitment.
Your opinion doesn't matter.
instead of listening to that little voice, you need to find yours and make it heard. It's time for all of us to speak up. Because when we change the dialogue, we can change our world.
So the clip says it's time for all of us to speak up. But when you're experiencing exclusion and being devalued, like we saw in the clip, you know, that can seem a very big mountain to climb, can't it? Especially when you feel alone. So that's where allies come in. And that's why, you know, allies are such an important part, you know, of our workplace culture. Yeah, I'll look out the link. Somebody wants to link to that video. I'll look it out. Yeah, no problem. Okay, so you might have heard the terms optical allyship or performative allyship. So optical allyship was actually a term coined by author Latham Thomas, based on earlier work on performative allyship. And so, you know, optical allyship is defined as one that only serves at the surface level to perform the ally. It's making a statement, but it doesn't go beneath the surface. It's not aimed at breaking away from the systems of power that oppress, she writes. Similarly, performative allyship is defined as allyship that's carried out more to increase a person's social capital, you know, instead of a true devotion to the cause. So I mean, it can take many forms, but a common instance is maybe, you know, showing public support on social media. They call it virtue signaling, don't they, on social media, just to, you know, raise your own platform, signal your own, you know, virtuous moral compass or something without any effort to do anything or take any real action. So it's putting on a display of activism without actually, you know, doing the actual work. To be clear, we're not talking about those this morning, but we need to be aware that it's a possibility that they exist within workplaces because, you know, and under the heading ally maybe. And the thing about that is those behaviours can do more harm than good, can't they? Okay, I'm going to ask us to move on to look at this. Someone's found the link. Brilliant, thank you. I'm going to move on to look at something for you to have a little self-reflection on. So I'm going to sort of bring you and into the role of allyship and see how you think this sort of lands with you. So bit of self-reflection. So I don't know if you want to grab a pen and paper or if you just want to, you know, work through in your head, but you'll get these slides afterwards anyway. What I'd like you to do is individually consider all the identities that your identity group memberships. That might include your gender, your ethnicity, your race, your family role. It might include your role at work, your professional role, your religious affiliations, all sorts of things. I fully appreciate that identity groups are complex, and I've put lots of individual little boxes on the screen there. And I know that these roles shouldn't be considered in a strictly binary sense. You know, we're not just black or white, just male or female. And those sort of identities, people might well fall beneath the binary identities, that some of the binary identities that are up there on the screen anyway. So taking into account that I recognise that's limiting, you know, I understand there's intersectionality here. I understand that there's a term that you prefer that might not be on the wheel there, but just use it as a kind of, you know, catalyst for your thinking. So what I'd like you to do is think about 3 or 4 of your identity group memberships that you most strongly identify with, or you feel most strongly define you. So I'm going to ask you to think about 3 or 4 that you think most strongly define you. And there might be things that aren't even on that wheel. You know, that's just an illustration. Okay, so think of that 3, think of that 4. I'll give you just a second to ponder and reflect on that one. Okay, and while you're reflecting, thanks to whoever found the link to that video and popped it in the chat for everybody. Okay, so you've got these 3 or 4 identities, and if you want more time to think about this, you can take this away and do it, you know, afterwards. All right, so I'm going to throw a few reflective questions up, and I want you to think through, in the light of what you've just, you know, those 3 or 4 you've got in your head, how you might respond, and you'll get, you know, if you want to think about this longer at the end, I'll come back and do so. Okay, so thinking about those identities, what part of your identity do you think people first notice about you? What part of your identity are you most comfortable sharing with others? What part of your identity are you least comfortable sharing with others? For what part of your identity do you face oppression most often? If you do. For what part of your identity do you face oppression most often, if you face oppression? For what part of your identity do you receive privilege most often, if you do? Which identities have the strongest effect on how you see yourself as a person? And finally, for this part, what part of your identity has the most effect on your interactions with colleagues? Okay. So I'd like you to reflect and to think about those and what that tells you. I'd particularly like you to think either now or at a later time after this session of the 4th and the 5th ones, the ones that are highlighted in a different colour there. For what part of your identity do you face oppression most often? For what part of your identity do you receive privilege most often? And maybe think how that your answer may differ to some of your colleagues' answers or people that you know, based on aspects of each person's identity. Who would be most likely, thinking about the people that you surround yourselves with at work, to be facing oppression? Who would be most likely, do you think, to receive privilege? And actually, what evidence or what examples have you got to have seen that in practice? And also, but back to yourself, how does that impact on you? How do you feel the oppression, if you feel oppression impacts on you? How do you feel your privilege has impacted on you if you feel you experience privilege? And of course, for some group memberships, you can experience both privilege and disadvantage, can't you, depending on the differing social context. The thing about this activity is, and I'm sorry I'm not giving you a lot of time to reflect, but we've only got an hour and we've got lots to share with you. So, but yeah, you can get these to look at afterwards. Many of us have privileges that are not afforded to everyone. You know, men, white people, heterosexual people, non-disabled people, people from a comfortable socioeconomic background, for example, do have advantages which are not available to people outside those groups. Now, those privileges are often invisible. But it is important to understand the extent to which these benefits affect daily life, you know, career, education, health, relationship with authority, amongst other things. And understanding and recognizing privilege within our own lives can be uncomfortable. And yet being honest with ourselves about discrimination which we might have benefited from, even though we didn't ask for it or intend it or even notice it, is quite eye-opening. It's a difficult process. We feel defensive about areas of life where we feel not privileged. I mean, I thought to myself, because I have experienced some privilege in my working life, and I thought, well, am I really the best person to be doing this webinar? You know, having experienced a bit of privilege, and I've thought, well, I'm here in the role of facilitator purely and simply, so I hope that rests okay. But it, you know, it makes us think about things a little bit different. So it is a difficult process. We can feel defensive about areas of life where we feel that we're not privileged, you know, but to be an effective ally, it is important to understand how the wider world perceives us and therefore benefits us or otherwise. You know, and then we're better placed to support people that don't have those same types of privilege. So recognizing our own privilege, if that's the case, is not about us feeling guilty. It's purely and simply about us being feeling able to act from a more informed position. It is harder to appreciate the impact of oppression if we look only through the lens of privilege. So a useful way to look at this, I've found, is to look at a piece of work that came from some earlier work by Kayla Reid, which is around boots and sandals. So I'll talk you through this and just see what you think about this, but I found it quite useful. So I'd like you to imagine that your privilege is a heavy boot that keeps you from feeling when you're stepping on someone's feet or when they're stepping on yours. So you've got the heavy boot, but oppressed people have only sandals. So if someone says, ouch, you're stepping on my toes, how do we react from our position of having those nice, comfortable boots on? So because we can think perhaps quite easily about literally stepping on someone's toes for real, you know, there may be thinking about the rather bigger topic of oppression. You know, we can sort of break it down, and some of the responses do become quite common, don't they? So maybe we hear this one, the act of centering ourselves, you know, look, I can't believe that you think I'm a toe stepper. Honestly, you know, I'm a really good person. What about denial that other people's experiences are different from our own? Well, I don't mind when people step on my toes. I'm not sure what all the fuss is about. I'm not attempting to trivialize the issue of oppression, but I just honestly think this helps us to kind of, you know, understand it quickly. What about derailing? I bet you've heard derailing. Well, some people don't even have toes. Why aren't we talking about them instead? No, that does happen, doesn't it? Refusal to center the impact. All toes matter. What about tone policing? Well, I'd move my foot if you asked me more nicely. maybe denial that the problem is at all fixable. Look, I know it's not great, is it? But you know, I mean, toes getting stepped on, it's just a fact of life, isn't it? I mean, really, you know, we'd be better off. I think we'll all be better off when we accept that, don't we? Won't we? Really, you know. What about victim blaming? Victim blaming. Well, you know, to be honest, you shouldn't have been walking around people with boots, should you? You know, then it wouldn't have happened. And maybe even withdrawing from the whole thing. Well, I thought you wanted my help, but I guess not. So I'll just leave you to it then. And, you know, I mean, I know in reality, and I wasn't trying to, you know, be flippant, but I think that's kind of a good analogy, isn't it, for helping us to understand how it's quite easy for some people to sidestep the very real issue. In reality, most of us naturally know the right way to react when we do step on someone's toes. And yeah, maybe think about that to learn how to react when we either commit or experience common mistakes or microaggressions. So yeah, how do we do that? Well, I would suggest that some of the ways that we can stand up, we know when we experience that kind of response, or when we witness that kind of response, or maybe if we're being honest, when we think to ourselves, actually, that has been me in the past, I have given that kind of response, albeit unintentionally. To cut through that, we can instead center the impacted. A simple, are you okay? Are you okay? Listening to someone's response and learn. So not thinking that we need to be defensive, not thinking that we need to immediately come back with a counter attack, just genuinely stepping back, listening and thinking, oh wow, honestly, that never even occurred to me. And to be open to learning. Apologize for the impact. If we've said something, we probably won't have intended it. 9 times out of 10 with a microaggression, people are unaware that they've said it or done it. So apologize. Look, I'm sorry, I didn't think about it that way. I had no idea. Obviously stop the instance, move our foot, and maybe stop the pattern, you know, be careful where and how we step in the future. I suppose when it comes to oppression, we actually want to change the footwear, don't we? So everybody's wearing boots, but you know, I suppose the metaphors only go so far. So thinking back, we might find, and I know I found, because it obviously happens a lot in this job when you're talking about this kind of subject matter all the time. People say, well, actually, have you thought about this? And you go, oh, no, actually, I hadn't, but thank you. So it happens to me a lot. It's easier to handle being corrected, isn't it, about something where there's a genuine opportunity to learn, and when you know that that person genuinely wants you to learn rather than wants to put you down or humiliate you. You know, it's rather than just simply being embarrassed of being wrong. It's so if you can, I think if we can let go of our ego and say, look, thanks for enlightening me. I hadn't really thought about it, or I wasn't aware of that. It's an important skill to develop, isn't it? I know this is going slightly off track, but not really. But there's a lot of work around inclusive leadership now, because recognizing that inclusive cultures have to come from the top. And one of the key attributes of an inclusive leader, isn't it, is to be able to show that openness and vulnerability, to actually be willing to learn, and you know, the fact that even our most you know, beloved leader can make mistakes. So it's an important thing, isn't it, to be able to let go of our ego and say, yeah, I want to learn. I think the easy way to do that is to say, thanks for letting me know, isn't it? And that can put ourselves in a better frame of mind. And I think if we need a bit of time as well to say, look, thanks for letting me know, obviously I need to go away and rethink the way I'm approaching this. We can, you know, we need some time to think about the situation. That's fine too. I also think wherever you come from the point of view of ally, victim, witness, it's not venting it. It's, you know, not trying not to vent it as a personal attack if it wasn't intended as a personal attack. I can see there's a Q&A asking about books for inclusive leadership guidance. Yeah, the Institute of Leadership and Management have got a couple of great guides on inclusive leadership if you go on there. If you also go on, if you Google Deloitte's 6 signature traits of inclusive leaders, those are 2 resources that are a great place to start. And have a play around on the FIR website as well, because there's inclusive leadership resources on there too. Okay, yeah, and we are including disability, visible or invisible, of course. I won't be able to reference and use every single example in the hour I have, but if I don't reference a particular example like invisible disability, which is really important, my apologies in advance. It's simply I'm using things to illustrate points, and yeah, I may miss some. All right, here, moving on, here are a few roles that you can take on to be an ally. Here are a few ways that you can be an ally, and you can see the link there on this slide to more detailed reading about these roles. So when an ally takes on the role of a sponsor, they vocally support the work of colleagues from underrepresented groups in all contexts, but specifically in situations that will help boost those colleagues' standing and reputation. So, for example, a long-standing senior manager might publicly say of a newer colleague, well, what I learned from Paulette was this, this, and this. So that's what a sponsor can do. Anybody can be a sponsor. But if you're a person in your business that is in a position of influence, then you are best placed to be a sponsor. So you talk about the expertise you see in others, especially during meetings. You recommend people for projects and learning opportunities that you think would be great, that might not have been the obvious go-to choice in the past. You share colleagues' career goals with influencers. So a sponsor can do a lot. The slides, by the way, all these slides will be shared at the end of the session. An ally can be a champion. So I'll give you an example. A few years ago, a male senior partner at IBM was a speaker at a conference, and he was on a panel along with 5 other panel members who were all men. And then a female member of the audience posed the obvious question to the all-male lineup, well, where are the women on the panel? And, this can be a bit like construction, can't it? I know we're improving, but particularly at senior levels in construction, we do look in many parts of the industry very white and very male. So back to my example. He realised he wasn't the best person to respond, and he also realised that none of the panelists were. So instead, he asked the woman who asked the question to take his place on the panel. And by stepping aside, he not only made the panel instantly more representative of the audience, he made a bold statement in support of gender diversity on stage and championed the female speaker at the same time. What you would then want, isn't it, is some more longer term actions after that. But, that's a great way to be a champion. So a champion is very similar to a sponsor, but in more public ways. Champions willingly defer to colleagues from underrepresented groups in meetings and in visible industry-wide events and conferences, sending meaningful messages to audiences. So again, anybody can be a champion, but if you are somebody listening in who is in a position of influence, then, so much the better. So another role that a ally can take is that of an amplifier. So in an organization where there may be quite a macho culture, and some of you might feel that describes parts of your organization, you might not, but as an example, an organization where there is quite a macho culture, where women and younger, newer starters in particularly felt they couldn't voice their opinions without being shouted over, there was a revision of how weekly meetings were conducted. So this firm introduced communication guidelines for a weekly meeting, including assigning a meeting mediator to give everybody equal airtime. Team members would take turns in roles. They set clear objectives, and they reminded everybody to be respectful during the meeting and practice active listening. So that was something that was an amplifier role. It was recognizing that marginalized voices were getting shouted down. So they took steps to recreate the communication methodologies of their meetings to make sure that everybody had a voice. So that's how you can act as an amplifier. When someone also when somebody proposes a good idea, you can repeat it and give them credit. So you can say, actually, I absolutely support Ash's recommendation for supply chain engagement there. And that's an excellent idea. I think we should try that. You create a code of conduct for meetings. You invite members of underrepresented groups within your company to speak at staff meetings if they're comfortable and confident to do that. You invite them to write for company-wide newsletters, or you invite them to take on other highly visible roles. So that's how an amplifier would work. Anybody can be an advocate. That's another role of an ally. When an ally takes on the role of an advocate, that ally uses their power and influence to bring peers from underrepresented groups into what you might say are more exclusive circles. So the advocate recognizes and addresses unjust omissions, and holding people accountable for those omissions as well. So you could look closely, invite lists. If you see somebody from a marginalized group missing, advocate for them to be invited. Offer to introduce colleagues from underrepresented groups to people in your own personal networks. So there are many ways that you know, an ally you know, can perform. Also, we can all be scholars. An ally seeks to learn as much as possible about the challenges and prejudices faced by colleagues from marginalised groups. So scholars never, ever insert their own opinions, experiences or ideas, but they simply listen and learn. I don't know if you've got somebody, not necessarily at work, but in a friendship group, and you want to tell them something, and they can't wait to go, oh yeah, that reminds me about the time when and you think, oh, can you just listen to me for once, you know? So a scholar simply listens and learns. We can all be scholars. We can investigate, we can read publications, we can listen to podcasts, we can, you know, scroll through social media by and about underrepresented groups from within our industry. We can ask co-workers from marginalised groups about their experience working at our company. We can be open to listening. We can realise the impact and learn about the impact of microaggressions. We can learn about our own unconscious bias. We all have it. If your company has specific forums, for example, a disability forum or an LGBTQ+ forum or a women's forum, we can learn from their expertise. So that's another role. We can all be upstanders. Every single one of us can be upstanders. When an ally takes on the role of an upstander, that ally acts as the opposite of a bystander. So the upstander is someone who sees wrongdoing and acts to combat it. The person calls out offensive comments or jokes, even if nobody within earshot might have been offended or hurt. If it's wrong, it's wrong. So an upstander will always speak up if they witness behaviour or speech that's degrading or offensive and goes against the values of their organisation. An upstander in meetings will shut down off-topic questions that are asked only to test the presenter. An upstander will take action if they see anybody in their organisation being bullied or harassed. Simply inserting yourself into a conversation with a comment as, oh, hi, how are you both today? What's going on here? What are you talking about? Can be enough. And then you could maybe check in with the victim privately, ask if they're okay. An upstander doesn't have to compromise their own safety. So if you think there's something that might put your own safety in jeopardy, you can still be an upstander by raising what you've seen or heard confidentially with somebody else. There's different ways to do that. And an ally can be a confidant. So when an ally takes on that role, ally creates a safe space for members of underrepresented groups to express fears, frustrations, and needs. Simply listening to, somebody's stories and trusting that they're being truthful creates that protective layer of support, particularly where not just if you're in a position where you can do something to change that, but also if you are. And so you can see that anyone can take on some of these roles, but when you have an allyship scheme within your organization, and when that's been formalized a little bit, you can see that the support for allies doing this becomes better. I know some of you said in the chat earlier that you have informal allies but no formal scheme, and that's great and absolute, amazing that people are doing that, but they're kind of doing it in isolation alone, aren't they, without a support network for them. So that's how you do that. Let me have a little look into the Q&As while we have a second and just see if there's anything there. In terms of inclusive leadership, there won't be a specific toolbox talk on that. But there are materials on the first site. Best thing is to go on the website, type inclusive leadership as well, and you'll get that kind of you'll get links to research as well. Institute of Leadership Management might provide videos as well, but if you do look at the Harvard research on inclusive leadership is good, and the Deloitte research is true as well. Will we ever be able to focus more on all people being people and individuals that matter and stop focusing on our differences? Wouldn't it be wonderful? I hope so. I think I'm maybe being idealistic here, but if you think about the timeline about when businesses were first starting to talk about equality and equal opportunities, and then we moved to the fact that this included equity. And then we moved to the fact that in order to have equity, we needed to improve diversity. So there were lots of very good initiatives on making our business more diverse. And now we've realized that that's not enough on its own. You can't just bring a load of diverse people into a business and expect them to be welcomed, respected, and included. We need to look at underlying cultures, and we need to work very much on inclusion. And I hope that this newer focus on inclusion rather than difference will move us towards focusing on everybody as individuals rather than differences. So anonymous attendee, I agree with you. I share your view. I'm hopeful that our move towards considering inclusion will enable that to happen. And I hope it'll happen in my lifetime. We'll see. Okay. In the time we have left, here is a short video which highlights some of the ways that we can show up as an ally at work, in addition to the ways that I have already mentioned. So let me just share this clip for you.
Let's start looking at some specific ways you can show up as an ally in your workplace. As you think about the actions you might take, it's helpful to keep your privilege and positional power in mind. When you recognize your privilege, you can better see the barriers that people with less privilege face and address them as you take action. And when you reflect on your positional power, you'll begin to see where you are best positioned to drive change. Your positional power is based on your role and level. We all have positional power. In fact, we often have more than we realize. So, how can you start taking action? It's helpful to think about allyship actions in 3 categories: individual, interpersonal, and structural. Individual actions are the steps you take to educate yourself, model good behavior, or change your mindset. There are many different types of individual actions. They often happen behind the scenes, but they're still really important. For example, learning about others' experiences is an individual action, and it's also a critical step towards showing up as an ally with empathy and understanding. You can also take individual actions to make your work more inclusive. This might look like using gender-neutral language in written materials, or making sure people of all races and abilities are represented in imagery. Again, these are just a few of many possible individual actions. You'll have a chance to explore others in the next part of this workshop.
Interpersonal actions involve supporting others and advocating for equity in your day-to-day interactions. Speak up when you notice inequity. For example, by correcting a colleague who assumes a new hire is straight or cisgender is an interpersonal action. So is mentoring a colleague with a traditionally marginalized identity or making sure they get credit for their accomplishments and ideas. Affirming someone's experience of inequity can also be a powerful interpersonal action. For example, letting a colleague know you're thinking of them when violence or hatred against their community is in the news. As you practice interpersonal allyship actions, remember that no two people or situations are the same. People with similar identities can have very different experiences, needs, and expectations. It's always important to think about the individual you're supporting, the relationship you have with them, and the specific barriers they're facing.
Finally, structural actions involve pushing for more equitable norms, policies, and systems. For example, advocating for objective criteria in hiring and promotions is a structural action. Another example is encouraging your company to use software and other tools that are accessible to people with disabilities. Before you push for structural change, take some time to learn about the solutions that people with traditionally marginalized identities are already working on. Then be intentional about aligning your work with theirs. Whether your actions are individual, interpersonal, or structural, remember that allyship is an ongoing practice. There's no finish line because there is always more we can do to promote equity.
Okay, so a look at the different ways that we can act as allies. And I guess you'll be listening in this morning with different work roles this morning. And maybe that'll give you an idea about where you can get involved. If you are in a senior position, there's many things you can do at the structural level. If you're not in that position, there's still a lot you can do. And if you think, well, actually, I came on this workshop and I'd really like to do more, but I'm not at that senior level, so yeah, I can learn and I can look at myself, but there's a limit to what I can do. You could maybe show this the recording of this webinar to somebody in your workplace and say, look, can you take a look at this, because I think this would benefit our workplace and I think we really need this. So there are things that we can all do, whatever level we are at. So in conclusion then, an ally must be open to regularly listen to those around them, adapt their thinking, rework sometimes what they have previously believed to be correct, and perhaps become comfortable being uncomfortable, I guess. Resources for after today then. So that book there, Better Allies, Everyday Actions, that's gives you more about, in more detail, about the different roles of allies that I touched on during the session, goes into more depth there. And I've also given you a link to a free resource, which is a guide to allyship as well, which gives you some further reading there. Okay, I'd like to thank you very much for taking part. I'm going to pop a link. So we've got a link to some feedback. Yeah, if I could just pop a link to some feedback in the chat. Once we finish the session today, I'd be really grateful if you would take just a minute or two to this in. Okay, I've just popped a link into the chat. We have a few minutes for comments and questions if anybody has anything they would like to ask or say. And while I just wait a second to see if anybody has any points of view, comments or questions, can I take the opportunity to thank you all for joining in this morning. I hope that's been useful, and I wish you well with your journey. But let's have a look at a few points and questions. Anonymous attendee, you say that your background and your privileges left you feeling guilty. I don't think guilt is a good place to start. I don't think we should feel guilty about what life has thrown at us. I think we should be honest and open and learn. So I would hate to think you'd go away from this feeling guilty, but it would be nice to think that you might want to find out a little bit more, maybe about impact of unconscious bias, maybe about microaggressions. So there's recorded webinars on the FIR website about microaggressions and micro inequities. There's a great resource on Harvard website about unconscious bias. These implicit association tests, they enable us to check out where our unconscious biases lie, so they can be quite enlightening. So I'd hope that you and other people who feel similarly would start from that positive standpoints. Beating yourself up and feeling guilty isn't going to make you feel good, and you're not going to be in the strongest position to be an ally anyway. So I would start from a positive point of view, that you recognize your privilege and you're going to use it, you know, in a good way, I would say. Yeah. But yeah, it is a challenge. Some good things in the chat. It is challenging for us all. See what, yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap it up now. I'd like to thank you all very much for taking part this morning. I hope that's been interesting, and I wish you well. Enjoy the rest of your day, and hope this has helped you on your journey with allyship. Many thanks, everybody. Thank you.